Hi guys, we're back again with critiques. This time we're going to be talking about paintings of children, and this happens to be one of my specialties. Now I have several volunteers that sent in their work and the reference photos that they were working from. So we're going to go through these one by one, take a look at ways that we can improve composition, skin tones, values, colors, and so much more. So let's get started. This painting is a commission of a 2-year-old who was the granddaughter of a friend. She had reached the end of her patience with having her photo taken and struck a pose that titled, "I'm 2." The artist says she loves the way that the girl is clearly outdoorsy with a band-aid, she's always sporting at least one, and her mosquito bites, combined with a cute dress and a big hair bow. So the artist says the problem she'd like to solve is how to be more creative and to work on achieving an atmosphere in her paintings. She would like to be looser and more colorful. She finds it hard to judge exactly where she is with her work and where she needs to grow. All right, well, let's take a look. Okay, so I've got the painting here on the left and her reference photo on the right, and wow, kudos for absolutely nailing that print on the dress. Wow, I think I would go cross-eyed from painting that pattern, but she really did a great job with that. And there's even an indication of the folds and the directions in the fabric, so that is just so well done. And I also do love the pattern and the design of the bricks where the girl is standing and the fact that you're kind of just looking down from up above at this angle. And so she's done a great job with capturing the little girl's attitude, the pose, all of it. So how can we give this painting an extra level of interest and oomph and just kind of take it to where she wants it to be atmospherically and so forth? Well, the first thing that I think of when I'm looking at this is really more to do with the colors. Her drawing is excellent. Everything is spot on. The colors in the background, I'm wondering what would happen if we did a little bit more with greens back there to maybe reduce some of the saturation. Because really this is sort of an indirect outdoor light. And that means that the colors are actually going to be a little bit less saturated, less warm. So our color palette is predominantly cool in indirect lighting. And what's happening here is that the greens in the background look almost like they're lit up brightly by the sun. So let's select some of those greens and see what happens if we maybe make them a little bit grayed down or slightly more bluish. So select all of that. It's not going to be perfect here. So we'll go to color balance, bring our slider over more to the blue, and already I feel like that looks better. So there's before and there's after. And I talk about glazing a lot in these critiques because a lot of the time the work that's sent to me is almost finished or already finished. And so this way, if you glaze, if you just use a medium like liquid or oleo gel and then mix a little bit of paint in there to tint it, that is a great way to change the color and the value of your painting without losing all of your drawing. So that's my recommendation for this background. Now, if we were to reduce the saturation just a little bit more, I don't know that we need to do that. Just having that, bringing it more to the blue and less to the yellow, I think is going to be helpful for that background. Of course, some of that carried into the trees here, which we don't necessarily want. Okay, the next thing I'm looking at has to do with some of the values in the skin tones. You see in the reference photo as the arm is turning down and around toward the dress, or this side of her face here, you know, there's a darker value and it also gets slightly grayer, at least it does in the reference photo. Now, given that she's working from a photo and we do have indirect light, we have limited color available to us in the reference photo. So she's actually done a really good job of plumping up the colors. But the one thing that I think of when I'm working from a photo and I know that it's outside is that there's all kinds of color and lighting bouncing around. And so that actually affects the skin tones a whole lot. So here too, I would recommend actually cooling down some of these skin tones because we've got the green grass, we've got the blue of the sky, the trees, all of those things kind of bouncing in and causing it to be slightly more cool. So let's try doing that and see what happens. So there's before, where it's a little bit more reddish, and after we've grayed it down a bit. Again, something that can be done with glazing. And then I would also recommend actually deepening some of those shadows a bit more. So there's before and after, and that's going to add some more contrast to the painting and give it a bit more power. To me, the painting feels a bit flat, and that's because there isn't a whole lot of contrast going on. So if we can add a bit more contrast, maybe some darks down here in the legs, darken that shadow where she's standing, and even darken these shadows in the dress a little bit. That's going to give us a bit more volume and three-dimensionality. Darken down here, that side of her face. Can darken in the hair. Yeah. Now the tree, she's smoothed out the tree, and I think that was a stylistic decision. I don't mind that at all, but some things are taken quite literally. So here, for example, there's this leaf on the tree. I don't know that it needs it. I totally get what she was saying about like the Band-Aid on her leg and the mosquito bites, and that makes perfect sense to me. I think that's a great idea, and if the parents or the grandparents really like that, then that should be included in the portrait. But this leaf to me over here is very distracting, so I would get rid of that. I'd get rid of this one back here, and maybe even simplify and get rid of some of these back here, because it's not about the background. And when you put in something that sharp and pinpoint, my eye goes straight there, and I want to be looking at this beautiful little girl. The artist did a great job of getting rid of some of these trees behind the girl's head. Excellent choice. Definitely agree with that. And so that's a good idea, but let's try, I'm still looking at the background a little bit. What if we were to darken some of that? Again, something that you can do with glazing. If we darken this down and even darken those bricks back there, just a hair, that's going to cause her to pop forward even more, which, yes, I feel like that helps a whole lot. So taking a look at the before, looks really flat because everything is about the same value. And then after, it feels more three-dimensional to me. And one more thought about this painting. The artist said they want to bring more atmosphere into their paintings, and a lot of that has to do with edges as well. So I am noticing throughout her work that we've got all of these hard edges, and she's being really true to her reference photo here. But what if we were to, maybe soften some of these edges? Have them be disappearing and blurring a little bit with the background. You can do that even with some of this stuff back here. Break it up a little bit. We've got such intense, straight and hard edges on the tree and on the bricks in the background that my eye really wants to kind of break up those shapes a little bit. So for me, I find that edges are really key to having atmosphere in your painting. And so that is something to play around with, ways that you can lose edges, soften edges, have only a few really hard edges in the painting, and make sure that where those are, that's where you want the eye to go. Atmosphere is a tough thing to capture, especially in portraits, but it has everything to do with edges. So hopefully you find this helpful. All right, this next artist is doing an 11 by 14 oil portrait of her grandson. She's working in water mixable oils, and she would like help with loosening up her style a bit and any portrait ideas that I can provide. All right, let's take a look. So here's her reference photo, and here's the painting. Now the reference photo looks like it was taken in portrait mode on an iPhone. As you can see, some of the blurriness happening here behind the subject's head. And that can be helpful just for figuring out ways to simplify the background. Getting rid of all the detail back there is great. She has swapped out, it looks like he was in some kind of a marathon or sports event, and he's got this medal wrapped around his neck, and there's people in the background. So what she's done is she's taken the background and simplified it to just this band of trees and sky and pavement here. Now, one thing I'm noticing is that a lot of these background shapes kind of all have the same sort of rectangular, straight, horizontal thing going on. And one way that she can add some more dynamic movement to the painting is, instead of having it go straight across, she could bring in a few more diagonals and some visual interest there. So it's kind of hinting at it in the reference photo, but let's see what happens if we take our image and bring some of that green down into just a little bit further down. And same here. That way we don't have such a harsh, strong cutoff there. And then what if we were to, I don't know, maybe soften that edge a little bit so it's not so harsh. what's happening is that was the first thing I saw when I looked at this picture. I was like, wow, that is such a straight, harsh line going across there. And it's, to me, really taking away from the subject. The other thing I'm noticing too, and it looks like this was she took a picture of her painting in a very warm interior light. So I don't know how true these colors are, but to me, the blue of the sky, the blue inside the sunglasses, and the blue in the shirt, I understand it's a gray shirt, so she's painted it very gray. But what's happening is it's losing that color that happens when it's outside. Cast shadows in bright sunlight often look blue. And so on the reference photo, you see how blue that is. She could really play that up even more in her painting and make those shadows within the shirt more saturated. So bringing in some ultramarine blue or similar cold blue and just bring up that saturation. I think that'll make it a lot more interesting. And that way you don't have just one section of the painting, those glasses, being blue. And then if we up the blue of the sky as well, let's make this day super bright. He looks very pleased with himself. So let's blue up that sky. Ah, yeah, much better. All right. I do love how she made the tops of the trees nice and soft. They're all different heights, and they're not tangent with the top of the head. Good job. That's a very important with design. So, and then the other thing that I noticed right away was anatomy wise, it looks like his arm here is much too thin. So I would really recommend plumping up that arm a little bit. Just take a look at that again in your painting and the reference photo and double check that. One thing I can do to just show how to correct that here is just simply copy it and make it a little bit bigger. Thicker. And that might mean having to cover up her signature and having to re-sign it a little bit, but that's okay. So the arm would end up being more like that. So here's before and here's after. And that's a whole lot better. One thing that I also noticed was that he's got these beautiful reds in his cheeks and his lips. And oftentimes when we're doing portraits of boys especially, we avoid the reds in the mouth. But he's still a young boy and he's lit up by the sun, and so there's red everywhere. There's red in the ears, so saturate those ears, saturate that cheek and the lips, and then darken. She's done a good job of showing what's in the light and what's in the shadow, and that can be extremely challenging with these kinds of paintings. But sometimes we get fixated on all the details inside the shadows and end up having it be a little bit too detailed. Another problem or possible problem that I'm seeing here is that she's working on a very textured canvas. And so when you're working with all these little details inside the face, that can be tough with a textured canvas. So I recommend, just simplifying as much as you can and softening some of these harsh edges that are within the shadow areas, because really the strongest edge that I can see is going to be somewhere like that cast shadow underneath the glasses here. And what she's actually done is soften it, but really we want that to be a harder edge. So let's see what happens when we do that. Take our brush. Okay. Yeah, so let's deepen this shadow in here. Let's deepen the shadow within the face. She's seeing this reflected light bouncing in, but it's still a little too bright. Just remember, reflected light is a deceptive term. Reflected light really belongs still in the shadow family. So we're going to keep darkening that on that side as well. And then this ear is also in shadow. And I would even darken pretty much this whole shadow area. We just want to see more contrast. She's done a good job of the value in the arm on this side and on this side. Could see maybe another transitional value in this arm just to help it turn a little bit more. And then our before the arm surgery and after. Okay, yeah. All right, and let's darken those lips even more. So we want something, let's match that red here. And let's go in there and deepen those lips. Don't be afraid to do this even on a portrait of a boy. They've got luscious red lips too, and can still look like boys. It's funny, the mental blocks we have that get in our way sometimes. All right, I'm darkening that shadow on his forehead, giving him a little cast shadow from his hair.
Yeah, I like that better. And actually I want to bring down these trees even further, because what I'm realizing is that they are kind of the same size as the other background elements are. We want them all to be slightly different. So you don't want them to be equal thirds, I guess. So let's bring that down even more on this side, just to keep that diagonal. All right, another thing that we're often very tempted to do is take the photo way too literally, and we talked about this in some of the other critiques. But looking at the ribbon around his neck, she's painted it faithfully in the position that it is, and it looks awkward to me. And so I wonder how it would look if we just simply made it so that it's wrapped a little bit nicer around his neck, because this side of the ribbon feels like it's attacking him a bit. Yeah, that feels better. So my advice for this artist is, try to make your own decisions based on what you think is going to make for a great painting rather than just copying your reference photo. I know it's hard enough to copy something, but this is where we transform from copyist to artist. And you have a great opportunity to learn that with each and every painting that you do. So even if it's just a small win here and there, like, oh, I changed the background a little bit, that's good. That is progress. So keep pushing that even further with every new painting, and you're going to discover that your paintings eventually become more and more not just paintings from photos, but actual works of art. So keep going with it. It's an exciting journey for sure. Okay, so this artist sent me a portrait of her oldest grandson. It's oil on canvas, and she feels that her paintings are stiff and she's struggling to be able to paint more loose and with a painterly style. All right, let's go ahead and take a look. Here is her painting and the photo that she's working from. Oh, this is gonna be fun. She chose a really nice photo, and the reason I say this is because he's got a really pleasant expression. He's not showing teeth, but he's still smiling, and there's a really distinct light and shadow pattern with this outdoor light. And there's still enough detail within the shadows that you can decipher what's actually in the shadows, so great reference photo. Now, she wants to be able to loosen up and make it more painterly. What really needs to happen is just to tighten up some of the values in here. So looking at the reference photo, you see a lot of, the forehead area, you can see some of the planes, but generally speaking, this is all quite smooth. And she's looking at the photo and seeing things like that slightly darker spot on the temple there, or here in the forehead, and making it so that it's almost too dark and it's creating a harsh form that's not really there. The thing about children is that their features are so subtle, so you have to be very careful with those values and keep those values really tight, close together. So what I'm going to recommend is going in and lightening that value on the temple there to about half of what it is. So it's barely there. And same thing with some of these planes here on the cheek, smooth some of this down. And that way he feels youthful, he feels younger. I would soften that edge here where that cheek is turning down and towards the jawline, and soften for sure the edge of this shadow here at the eye socket, and then here where the forehead plane turns away towards the shadow. You can do this either by mixing up more paint and going in with a brand new layer of paint, or going in with a slightly less thick layer of paint and scumbling in some of those areas. But my advice, if you are trying to become much more painterly, is to just go for it with a new layer of paint and have lots of paint on your brush. That's the thing about working in these light areas, is that that's where you can play with a lot more paint and just kind of push it around until it's right where you want it to be. The areas that you want the paint to be a little bit thinner would be areas like here inside the eye socket, the shadows on the shadow side of the face, because you don't want those to come forward. So keep the paint thinner in those areas, but just go to town on these lights. So softening some of that here, we'll look at before and after. That's already helping a little bit, but then it looks like he also needs a darker value here where the cheek is turning around and up into the light. So we need a transitional value there between that dark and that light, because what's happening is it's flattening it out and it feels like it's not as round as it could be. So if we mix up, it's hard to do in Photoshop, but if we mix up something kind of in between those two and go in there, and I want it to be redder. a little bit redder, a little bit darker, because the red does tend to center in those cheeks very nicely on children. We could go redder down here, further down the cheek, and then the opposite cheek there too, that could be redder as well. And I'm still needing something kind of in between those two. Here we go. That's turning a little bit more. The other thing I'm noticing too in the reference photo, if you look at his forehead, there's a little bit more yellow in the forehead and then more pink in the cheek area. And then it gets a little bit cooler, so you see more greens and blues and purples in the jawline. And this is pretty typical of faces in general. So you can play up some of those color differences very subtly, of course. And let's see what happens if we add a bit more yellow to the forehead. We could even warm up this side of his cheek a bit more. So bringing in some more yellow and red in there. I want to see more color. We could also just saturate it a bit more here in the cheek and the forehead. Yeah. So don't be afraid of color, especially with outdoor light. It's a great opportunity to play up some of those warm colors in the skin. I'm noticing that the artist changed the color of his shirt. I don't have a problem with that. I think that's just personal preference. But as I'm walking over the whole painting with my eye, and I'm looking for things that stand out to me. And here's one thing that stands out a whole lot, and that's this piece of light here on the side of his neck. If you look at the reference photo and squint at it, it goes way back into the shadow. But in her painting, it's really standing out. So I would darken that a whole lot. That's better. Yeah, darken that. And then as we're looking into the shadows in the eyes, squint at the reference photo with me. Do you see how the details just kind of disappear? But then in the painting, if you squint at it, they still pop forward, and that tells me that that's a value problem. So if we were to go into those eyes and knock down some of the lights, especially in the whites of the eyes and the lower eyelid there, and make those kind of blend in with the values within the eye sockets. So darkening, 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 and then let's up the saturation there and darken inside that eye socket a bit more too, so that this is truly in the shadow. It's really hard to do when it's someone you love and you're like, oh, I'm just getting rid of their eyes. Well, part of that is because of the reference photo that was chosen for this. And so if we're going to make it really look like them, an image like this, you're more dependent on the big forms and the big structures within the face rather than details like eye color. And so that's going to be really important to get the structure right and put things in their proper place with values. All right, so we darkened in the eye sockets. We could plump up those pinks in the lower lip there. And also, I think maybe lighten it too, because there's highlight coming in down there. The other thing that I noticed, and I don't know if the artist is going to like this too much, but the nose actually needs to be a little bit wider here at the base. So looking at the reference photo, he's got just a slightly wider nose, and if you look at where the tip of the nose lines up with the eye, it's going to come out just a smidge. So let's see if we can give him a little bit of surgery here. We'll use our liquefy tool, and I want to make sure I'm looking at the reference photo while I'm doing this. But if we were to just move that nose out a little bit wider, that looks much more like him. So here's before our changes, and here is after. Like I said, if you want to be more painterly and more loose, just use a lot more paint. We didn't really talk a whole lot about edges in this painting, but edges are going to be very important for that as well. Working to find ways to make it not look like a cutout against the background. The hair is a great opportunity for that. So you can lose some of your edges in the hair Kind of blend those in with the sky. You don't want to lose them all over, but here's a great spot right here where the highlight meets the sky. That could be a lost edge as well. Obviously, it looks a little different in Photoshop than it would in painting, but that's just an idea for you. One other thing I would recommend, and this is drawing my eye in, is maybe bringing this horizon line down just a little bit so that there's more sky back there, because it's kind of cutting him off at a strange spot. So let's try that. And I like that better. And I almost wonder if we were to get rid of some of that brown and just make it a bit more green, then it wouldn't be quite so distracting back there, because this really is all about him. It's about the little boy. So anyway, I think this portrait has great potential. In fact, I'm going to darken that a little bit too right there. Can always find something to work on. Has great potential. Please keep going with it. And yeah, I look forward to seeing the finished result.